You are now listening to the Project Kuwait. Where we stop at nothing to bring you the right facts on health, fitness, and psychology. Featuring some of the world's most experienced professionals so you can learn, live, and live. With your hosts, Meg, Dr. D, and Mehdi.
Knew I wasn't really going anywhere with it, which was disappointing to me because coaching seemed like my dream job. I could just tell I was getting kind of dicked around, wasn't getting anywhere financially or, career-wise with it after about a year and a half in. So I had a opportunity to work as a production manager at a kombucha company. Anyway, I was there for 6 months. The economy crashed and they said they couldn't afford me anymore. I wasn't too excited about taking a 50% pay cut. So I had already had a ticket home to visit. And so I just decided not to come back. Literally the day I found out, let's say 10 a.m. on Monday, hey, we aren't going to get a sponsor license. Sorry, we can't keep you. I had about a month left on my UK tourist visa. So I had to leave the UK in a month anyway. Mm-hmm. Monday, 10 a.m., find out I'm not going to get a visa. 2 p.m., get an email from the gym in Vietnam saying, hey, Ben, what's up? Things are going well. We want to talk to you about coming out again. By the way, are you in London? I'm here now.
All this and more in today's episode.
All right. Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Expat Abroad series. And I'm joined today with Benjamin Palmer, who is a very well-traveled expat living in 8 countries abroad and is the 2017 Fittest Man in Cambodia. Congrats.
My proudest achievement, more so than a college diploma or anything else, will surely go on my gravestone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. So you have been all around the world, a lot of places, but your expat journey started in Kuwait, which is where this podcast is also started.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm just kind of curious. So something I like to ask all the expats is what was going on in your life? First of all, where are you from? And then what was going on in life at that time where you decided that moving to Kuwait and living abroad was the right choice?
Yeah, so from Texas in the U.S. and grew up in Houston and then lived in Austin for about 8 years. So in 2013, I was coaching at, was then a very prominent CrossFit gym called CrossFit Central, and knew I wasn't really going anywhere with it, which was disappointing to me because coaching seemed like my dream job. I could just tell I was getting kind of dicked around, wasn't getting anywhere financially or, career-wise with it after about a year and a half in. So I had a opportunity to work as a production manager at a kombucha company, which was kind of just presented to me, and decided to leave coaching, take the job as kombucha production manager, which would be very similar to like working at a brewery. So large vats and time and bottling and along those lines. But after a couple of months of that, quit because I just knew it wasn't the right fit. I would say I kind of felt like a great white shark in a cage, just as much as it was kind of fun the first month or so, being with the same 3 guys in a warehouse all day, running a bottling line and fighting with like labeling machines, just wasn't really sustainable for me. So without a plan, which is going to be a common theme, I just quit my job and was proceeding to have the absolute best summer ever in Austin, not working. I was really tan. I was hanging out hardcore. But I was pretty rapidly knowing that best summer ever is going to turn into the autumn of despair because my measly savings were not going to last very long. So I was at a point where I knew I was either going to need to get back into coaching or find a new job or kind of move to a new city. And I didn't really have a strong opinion about any one of those. So without getting into like the hyper specifics, the opportunity to coach in Kuwait, once again, was more or less just presented to me. And at that time, no job, dwindling savings, I really had way more reasons to say yes than to say no. And I had always had in the back of my head that I had wanted to live abroad and travel abroad. I went to India once when I was in college for like a month with a program through my college there. So I'd only been out of the country once. And so it had always kind of been on the list of things, but I just never put it into practice. So when it was presented to me, I kind of said, why not? And I think there's a reoccurring theme that I said, what's the worst thing that could happen? And just kind of dived in feet first. And that would have been about November of 2013.
That's amazing. Yeah. I think what's the worst that can happen? I think definitely when you're in that situation where you're like, well, I know how to make it on quite a bit less than what I maybe want or am comfortable with. But I think, some of that resourcefulness comes through and it's you always know that you can go back to doing what you were before. Like those opportunities were there. Like kombucha wasn't the passion, but it was also a means to live at the time. And there was always going to be something like that, I think, to come back to. So why not take the risk?
Yeah, I think, like in that situation, I could have gotten a coaching job in Austin and I could have worked at another gym. I just wasn't sure if I necessarily wanted to. And especially because at that time, although still most coaching jobs are just kind of hourly and you're kind of scrapping by. And it just kind of seemed like maybe not the best option, but it was always an option. So
yeah, amazing. So what was that first impression of Kuwait like? Since there was the second time abroad. I suppose you'd been to Asia before, so maybe a little bit familiar from your India experience.
Yeah, but they're also wildly different. Being in Bangalore versus being in Kuwait City is a fairly different feel. But just the fact that it's different, is that sense alone. So I think the first time anyone was removed from their comfort zone and from their environment, that can be a bit of a shock. Although those first 3 months didn't really feel like, it took a while, I think, for the little things to catch up to me. Those first 3 months were a bit of like a blur. And I think I really just enjoyed the ability at that time to just kind of coach and hang out and just kind of be present with that and not have to really kind of worry about all the kind of like task and like menial things that you kind of worried about back home. So yeah, I think it really kind of caught up to me a little bit more month 3 or so. And you start noticing the smaller kind of cultural differences along the lines once you kind of get over the novelty of everything just being different from there. So I don't know. It never, nothing threw me off that bad. I never felt that out of place. I know that some people just a little bit of, kind of bumping them up a little bit, that kind of makes them hide into a corner. But I guess I'm not really wired up that way. So I think the differences or the kind of the struggles or the challenges which are still minor, relatively actually, were kind of, exciting for me for a bit.
So Kuwait, you coached for how many years in Kuwait?
I surely was not there more than a year and a half. I think at the absolute.
Wasn't that quick? God, I feel like it was longer.
I think it must have been, I must have left sometime in the late spring of 2015.
Okay.
Is what I think. And it must have been like around April or something like that.
Okay. And where did you go next? And how did that come about of like continuing that journey? So you got the experience in Kuwait. You felt like you got what you needed out of that experience maybe. And then it was kind of like on to the next, or did you get bored, or what kind of transpired next?
I think I really, like you said, I kind of got what I wanted out of the experience in Kuwait and signed on for a second year, mainly out of that I didn't have anything else lined up. And it wasn't anything against my experience in Kuwait, one or the other, but that was just ended up being the default.
Right.
And so, but that wasn't necessarily like, I think once I had kind of, and at that point, which now would have been several years ago, the mentality was, okay, well, I had a taste of kind of this expat life and this kind of experience of being involved in different cultures and being around. And so I was kind of like, I was getting a little itchy in the sense of maybe I want to do something different and maybe I want to do more. Maybe I can can do this other places. Mm-hmm. And, maybe like Kuwait isn't the end all be all, or for a lot of people, maybe even like Dubai was like, okay, well, then I'll make it when I go to Dubai. And it's like,
that seems to be like the common next step from Kuwait.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, for me, that wasn't like the most exciting thing to do.
Same. Yeah.
Just from an experiential standpoint.
Yeah.
From there. So
it's funny. Another episode that I wanted to do was actually people who have made the jump from Kuwait to Dubai and then ended up coming back to Kuwait, because there's a lot of people that have done that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the ability to pay $15 for a beer wasn't like so exciting to me that I was like, that'll be the perfect life for me.
Right.
So yeah, basically after Kuwait, it started a very circuitous and somewhat spur of the moment span that lasted about 5.5 years. And so I ended up going to Kazakhstan, and I was there for 6 months. And I won't even walk you through how that ended up. But once again, it was essentially just handed off to me. And at that time, it really was it was a pay raise from what I was making in Kuwait, and it was a promotion as I would be head coach. And this was before the borough and all those things. So it was a co-ed facility. Alcohol is legal, whatever. So it was like a no-brainer to say no, right? So once again, I had way more reasons to say yes than to say no. So I was in Kazakhstan for 6 months. And
did that connection to Kazakhstan come through Kuwait, or was that just something like you just found it like randomly, or what was
if you remember John Maxwell.
Yeah.
I think he had taken one of his like level 2 courses with one of the guys who owned the gym in Kazakhstan. So they had been in contact with him and had been asking him to come out for a while because they just wanted they wanted a Westerner to come out and, be the showpiece of the,
Right.
of the gym to an extent. So he went out and did that for 3 months, and then really decided that he wanted to go back to the UK and start looking at opening up his own facility, because at that time he wanted to go back to the UK. And I know then he ended up back in the Gulf for a little bit, but
yeah, I couldn't remember the timeline of. I know you guys both were out in Kazakhstan, but I couldn't remember how that went.
Essentially, he went out there for like a 3-month contract,
right?
And then he was ready to go, and he moved back to the UK for a bit. And then he essentially, like, I think I may have like hit him up, and I was like, "Hey man, I think I'm ready to do something else." And he was like, "Oh, actually, you can just have this job. I'll tell them to hire you." So like, without like to downplay my networking abilities, that was once again more or less just handed to me.
Yeah.
So I was there for 6 months, and that was definitely a very different experience. It gets up to -40. That's where Celsius and Fahrenheit become the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, I was there from basically the summer until the end of December, and that was an interesting experience. Like in Kuwait, as you know, and as maybe other expats who listen to this know, is English is not it's common. It's not a problem to get around.
You can get away with it easily. Yeah.
You're not inspired at all to,
To
for
learn.
better or for worse. Yeah, for better or for worse, you're not really inspired to learn Arabic. In Kazakhstan, English is not that common, and so there's no signs that are in English unless you went to college after the fall of the Soviet Union, or you work in international business. You probably don't speak much English.
Right.
And then like it's a much more kind of like Soviet mentality of like, if you're a sportsman, then you're a sportsman and you don't go to university.
Okay.
So all of the other coaches and trainers didn't speak English, from that point. So I did actually actively try to start learning Russian, although don't try to get me to speak any, but
I was just going to say, how'd it go? Can you
Yeah. So it was, it's an interesting place because it is the Muslim majority country, but it also has a very, Soviet and Russian influence as well. And, half of the people there are ethnic Russians and half of them are ethnic Kazakhs. Kazakhs also have their own language as well, which they only kind of speak as like inside of the house, but Russian is the lingua franca that's around. And it's also got, it's like on the Silk Road. So it's this kind of mixture of Islam and USSR and Mongolia, if you had to try to like blend all those two together. So
yeah.
And if you look up pictures of Astana, which I'll recommend every of your listener just types in Astana into Google, look at some photos of there. The middle of the city is like this insane George Jetson futuristic looking strip down the middle. I think that the city has actually been changed to Nazarbayev, I think, after the former president, who was president for like 20 years or whatever. But so,
oh, wow.
Yeah, but I think if you type in Astana, you'll still see it. It's the old name. So,
okay.
Anyway, I was there for 6 months. The economy crashed, and they said they couldn't afford me anymore. I wasn't too excited about taking a 50% pay cut. So I had already had a ticket home to visit. And so I just decided not to come back. And then that kind of started a little bit more of things kind of going throughout. So to speed things up a little bit more, just to kind of walk you through that journey, then I went home for a month to visit. And then I went to Jakarta in Indonesia and had a short-term gig contract job there for 2 months. Had a great time.
You had the gig before you went to Jakarta, or you got the gig while you were in Texas and then went out there for the gig?
When that last month I was in Astana, I started lining these up. I lined this one up because I was like, well, what am I going to do?
Right.
What's going on? So kind of rerouted my tickets and made it work. But I had lined up the gig in Jakarta. So I went out to Jakarta for 2 months. And then I had lined up a job in Cambodia to then take over as head coach of the first CrossFit gym in Cambodia. And so I moved there, and I was there for 2 years.
That's amazing.
That was a time where, despite I was head coach in Astana in Kazakhstan, that was the time where I was actually operating more as a head coach with a little bit more kind of roles and responsibility. And it wasn't just an honourary title. So to speak.
How did that go, leading a team of coaches that don't speak the same language as you?
Well, like I said, it was in Kazakhstan, it was a bit more of an honorary title. So,
okay.
Like I wrote the schedule and I think I wrote the programming, but there was almost no communication after that. I tried doing a little bit of coaching development, but it was kind of like fell on literal deaf ears. Even if I had one of the owners translating, I could tell that none of them were really into it.
Yeah.
That business is now closed. I won't say that is because they didn't listen to me. But I'll just leave that there. Yeah. When you focus only on growth and not on retention, you can kind of figure out how that works. But
absolutely. That's a good point.
So anyway, yeah. So then I was in Cambodia for 2 years. That was probably my first real taste of like real, what I would consider expat life and kind of an expat circle and vibe, which would be more equatable to a lot of people's experience. As you know, in Kuwait, there's not really a lot of expats. It's essentially like the international school teachers who kind of keep to themselves.
Yep.
Don't really talk to anybody outside of their little bubble. And then the fitness coaches, and then whatever
military contract workers
who live on the bases, and then like divorced British people who are there to pay for their kids' college.
Yes. Nailed it.
If I really had to put people into bubbles, you're probably one of those.
It's true.
So anyway, and in Kazakhstan, there was once again the international school teachers who are very cliquey and keep to themselves. And then there's like the U.S. embassy staff who didn't really want, even though despite they were across the street, they didn't really want to get involved in the gym at all because they have a gym at the embassy, so they didn't really care. So like I had no expat friends in Kazakhstan actually at all.
Yeah.
So like I basically had a couple local friends and it was there, but then I was in Cambodia and this gym was like this little gem of an expat bubble, kind of micro gym where like 120 members at that time. And Cambodia is a really interesting place for a lot of reasons. And the people that are attracted to go there, a very specific type of person. You know, there's a large NGO scene there. There are a lot of people doing kind of cool and interesting things, trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And, working on there, there's UN staff. Certainly there are international school teachers as well, but the vibe there was very different. Everyone's kind of open and wants to hang out. Cambodians are extremely friendly despite all the adversities they'd have to overcome over the last 40 years or so.
Right.
At the end of, their own government and the US as well. So, a little carpet bombing action. Anyway, so I was there for 2 years, then quickly made a jump, took a job back in the Gulf. I'm not going to name names, but it was in the UAE, and took a job back in the UAE and promptly decided to quit after a month to be a little bit more regional. As I'd say, well, it's shit. I don't know. The owners are just fucking idiots. Is the best way I can describe it. And
yeah,
I knew, and I guess I just kind of like could tell that read the writing on the wall that wasn't going to be the experience that I wanted it to be. And the little bit of money that it was kind of like more than I was making in Cambodia certainly wasn't worth it, especially the headache isn't worth it. So promptly decided to leave after a month. So did not make my probationary period. Went to London and I was there for 6 months. And let's say that I went there without planning on working. I went there just to like put my head down and kind of like hang out with my friends and figure out what my next move was. I'm one flight away from Texas if I needed to get to home.
And that's what's so cool is about like this like Rolodex that you obtain of people from all over the world. So literally like name a country. I have a friend to go hang out with for a little bit to put my head down and
exactly.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So went to London, and without getting into the whole thing, let's say that I essentially walked into a gym to work out and left as the manager or left as the head coach.
Awesome.
Let's say that. So worked there for 6 months illegally. Don't tell the queen. And was trying to get a visa, but it wasn't going to work out. Work of a technicality because the company didn't meet the requirements. It wasn't me, but it was just kind of like they had opened a second location and it complicated things for them getting a sponsor license. So, and then these kind of synchronicities, when I had first left UAE and went to London, I had talked to a couple of gyms, one in LA, one in Hong Kong, and one in Vietnam. And I talked to this gym in Vietnam. They had just opened. They seemed nice. But they were like, yeah, we just opened. We can't offer you a full-time salary. And essentially then literally the day I found out, let's say 10 a.m. on Monday, hey, we aren't going to get a sponsor license. Sorry, we can't keep you. I had about a month left on my UK tourist visa. So I had to leave the UK in a month anyway. Mm-hmm. Monday, 10 a.m., find out I'm not going to get a visa. 2 p.m., get an email from the gym in Vietnam saying, hey, Ben, what's up? Things are going well. We want to talk to you about coming out again. By the way, are you in London? I'm here now.
Oh my gosh.
So I did a 4-hour turnaround time between finding out I had to leave the UK and then essentially having a prospective job offer coming through.
Holy shit.
So the owner happened to be British and he happened to be like home for a month. And so he drove into London on Wednesday, saw me coach. Saturday I had his job offer. And 3 weeks later I went to Vietnam. And so I was in Saigon, aka Ho Chi Minh City, for a year, which once again was kind of a more classic expat scenario, different vibe for sure than Cambodia. Draws a lot more English teachers and kind of people kicking around. Also a lot more developed. Infrastructure there is a lot more, but it's literally right next to it, 6-hour drive away from Phnom Penh in Cambodia, but it still feels rather different in terms of how the city feels and the people that are there. So, so I was there for a year. and did a little experiment and stepped away from coaching and did some remote sales work for a while. That kind of fizzled out. Took a job in...
Did that come through, like, were you working with like sales for coaches, or was it anything within fitness, or where did that...
It didn't have anything, without getting into like too much detail.
Okay.
Essentially, I was doing what's referred to as enrollment coach work, which has nothing to do with fitness coaching. It really just means that you're doing sales work to enroll somebody into a program. I was enrolling people into like a digital marketing, quote unquote, masterclass program that taught them how to do digital marketing, sell their services, and like mentored them through the way. So I was doing that, which is essentially like doing Zoom calls, sales calls over Zoom. So I did that for a couple of months and traveled around for a little bit, but that fizzled out. And then hyper synchronistically again, then got a coaching job in Costa Rica. So then I went to Costa Rica and I was there for 6 months. Then that fizzled out. And then I came back to the US in the middle of January. So about 3 months ago on the dot.
Wow.
That's kind of the run of my whole expat journey. So
yeah.
I think, not to toot my own horn too much, but I think that's worked in 9 different CrossFit gyms across 9 different countries, I guess, including back in the US as well. So it's quite a wide range of experiences, despite even if one of them was a month, but that's still, it's still something. So
yeah, absolutely. So with a lot of them, you kind of mentioned towards the end, like things fizzled out. Was that more so just your maybe like passion and excitement of being in the area or being in the facility that it fizzles out? Or was that more like business wise, like these businesses have a really hard time thriving in their communities?
Which are you talking about? Like the one, not so much the sales jobs. Are you talking about the one in Costa Rica?
Yeah, like Costa Rica. And then I think in Vietnam, you had said that one kind of fizzled out towards the end as well.
No, the one in Vietnam didn't fizzle out. I was that one was thriving and doing well. I just decided to once again take a leap of faith.
Just try something new. Yeah.
Just completely try the sales job because it was kind of like dangled in front of my face as being fairly lucrative. And, and then the ability to be completely like, remote. And location independent was a very like sexy, appealing thing. So I guess I was kind of willing to like, quote unquote, risk everything and throw away this like good thing that I built up in Vietnam to try to chase down 100K a year and being able to work remotely. That didn't work out, but things in Vietnam were going good.
Okay.
So, and then in Costa Rica, I mean, this is something that I've kind of learning to talk about better. I actually got fired.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And this is like, let's say this, after 8 years of coaching, I was never fired from a job until these motherfuckers fired me after 6 weeks. I'll say this. So anyone who knows me will perhaps find this is funny. I don't need to put them on blast too much, but I will a little bit. I was fired under very kind of like shady circumstances where they said like clients were complaining that my vibe in class was bad. Which,
oh man.
I don't know. Like, I'm certainly not like, I never said like I'm an amazing world-class coach, but like, if anything, I've got the vibe, like VYBE, I've got the vibe. Maybe I can't like teach you to be like a national weightlifting champion, but I've got the fucking vibe, man.
I was gonna say, I've seen plenty of your classes and I know that, people engagement and connection is not something that's lacking in the class or fun for that matter.
Yeah, they were managing it remotely. So they were American owners who lived in the US and had like hired me to basically run it and work it. And they're in a bit of a situation where I think like they have so few members that if one person complains, it feels like the whole gym is collapsing.
Right.
So I was fired, which was a shock to me. And I kind of took with a grain of salt. Now, I've learned over the last 2 months that they proceeded to then fire the other person that had been there for 4 months under similarly kind of vague, shady circumstances. Right. And then they hired somebody else and they were treated a very similar way as well. So now I feel much better about that whole situation.
Right.
Because it surely is their lack of ability to have anything.
What's the common denominator?
Yeah, the common denominator is like either you're horrible at hiring people or you're horrible at managing your own expectations and the ability to like manage people remotely. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't need to put them on blast too much, but fuck them. But so I got back in the US and kind of got my thoughts together. And about 2 months ago, moved out to Denver in Colorado, which is something that had been on my mind for a little bit in the sense of I'd wanted to have easier access to nature and get into activities like mountain biking and skiing and snowboarding that I'd never had access to before. So I had a very good, interesting offer to get involved with a very successful gym that runs a kind of boot camp and a CrossFit program in South Denver and kind of said, you know what, I'll give it a go. And I'm glad I came out. And so it's been a good run so far. So I've been out here about 2 months. So
Nice.
mhm.
Welcome back. What I know I've spent the last year re-civilizing from Kuwait life back to US. I guess what's been some of the struggles or excitement of coming back to US, or what's different now, I guess, after living so many different places, having such cultured experience, what is different now back to when you're back in the US? Like, do you view things differently? Are like relationships a little bit differently? Like, do you find the same connection with people that you had when you left? Or those are just some of the things that kind of came up for me.
Sure. That's a hard question to answer. And we chatted about this for a moment off the air, is because I came back kind of unexpectedly and then was kind of quickly just in job hunting mode and kind of figuring out what I was going to do. So that first month I was back was really just kind of like in the mode of figuring out what I was going to do. And then, I moved to Denver about 2 months ago. Kind of started working a week or so after that. So I had about 4 or 5 weeks of normal work, but I was completely readjusting back into like a new job, new city, new everything. And then the Corona thing got set in place, which completely flipped everything on its head. So I haven't really like had a sense of normalcy yet. So it's actually like more exciting.
It's like a whole nother country.
Yeah, it's like being in a whole nother country because it's completely different, like, way of operating along those lines. So I think the readjustment, because the last place that I really lived for a while was Vietnam, that I count. So my experience in Kuwait, I'm actually quite removed from now at this point.
Right.
And so it's more like, in Vietnam, my room was clean 6 days a week, and I had like a meal delivery service that dropped off like 2 meals a day, Monday through Friday. And, I lived, 800 meters down from the gym, and I had a Vespa scooter, and, like I had this seemingly like idyllic, easy life. So to get back into like, oh, things are farther away from each other, and I have to clean my own room. Like,
I was just going to ask, the expat package, I feel like we get pretty spoiled on. I mean, even in Kuwait, it's like housing, car, or transportation.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are all paid for. Was it similar in the rest of those countries as well?
No.
Okay.
Kuwait and Kazakhstan were the only ones that I really had like full package setups.
Got it. Yeah.
Everything else outside of there is basically like, here's your salary and you just live here.
So in Vietnam, it was just more affordable. Is that basically?
Extremely. Yeah. Similarly in Cambodia, but just didn't set myself up in that same way. And Cambodia is on the USD, whereas Vietnam is on the Vietnam Dong. So it's not quite, your money doesn't quite go as far in Cambodia, despite the economy not being as flourishing. But so, yeah, it was just that in Vietnam, it was so affordable for me to have essentially like a brand new, studio apartment with like 6-day week cleaning and like all this other stuff kind of going into it. And it wasn't like I was like living like a king, like, but it's getting back, getting back into the US and having to be like, oh, like all this stuff along those lines. So this kind of like reverse culture shock, which I've kind of slowly, slid back into.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Just a little bit of the adjustment. So overall, in something that came up a lot, I guess, in talking about your shift from place to place or job to job is essentially leaning into the losing comforts and being okay with taking a little bit of a risk or stepping into something that's a little unknown. So I guess, is that like the biggest skill that you think that came out of this experience, or kind of a highlight of that? Or how does risk taking, can you just talk a little bit more about like that decision-making process of like what makes it so comfortable for you to take those risks, or even like, what's the thought process, in assessing the risk, I guess?
Right. Well, I mean, like a lot of your listeners are like CrossFit orientated, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that super old school saying of you got to
prepare for the unknown.
No, not that. It's like you have to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
In that sense. So I think, in a lot of these scenarios, some of the scenarios at least, I was comfortable and I had what seemed like a good thing going on. And I seemingly like jumped ship to go pursue something different. And, you can break that down in a lot of different ways, but I think the bigger thing I see fear holding people back from making decisions that they do truly want, but they're so kind of crippled by their own anxiety or fear about this kind of what if scenario. And then it just makes them more sad that they don't do it, or makes them, and it may be low level. Like they're not like, oh, I didn't take that job, or I didn't, moved there, I didn't do this. And it's kind of this low level dissatisfaction. So I kind of wanted to live in a way that I knew that I did it, like I pursued it, and I wasn't going to run away from something out of fear or anxiety. I was choosing to do it kind of purposely. And so
Yeah.
even if I knew and I think that's not having a victim mentality about if you're being in a situation where you are uncomfortable, you're an adult, you can figure it out, and you chose to do this, and you can choose to get out of it as well. So I think kind of empowering yourself to make decisions that might make you uncomfortable, but might make you happier in the end. And that's a big thing. It's a big discussion with yourself. And you see people who make this decision. Perhaps you saw some expats in Kuwait who did this. They came out and then they took on a victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this sucks. I don't like that. And it's like, well, you kind of made this decision to come out here. Like it's not really anybody's fault one way or the other. So
right. Some personal responsibility in that. And I like what you said of you chose to get into this situation. You can also choose to get yourself out should you find that it's not what you want. So it's like, give yourself that permission of, I can take this risk, but I can also, it's okay for me to mess up. It's okay for me to clean it up. It's okay for me to, move on to the next thing. Yeah.
I think in the US in general, I mean, I can't speak to every country, but just from my own experience and even just kind of being back, is there's this kind of crippling fear of anxiety about everything.
Yeah.
And when you're in a expat scene, as I kind of experienced, especially in Cambodia and some other places, like the mentality of people there is a bit different. And so, my challenge to myself is now that I'm being back, how do I not slide back into this kind of like overriding, like about everything mentality? Right. So how do I keep a more fluid, open, heart and mentality while being based back in the US at least? So
totally.
That's kind of my, right now, I haven't needed to feel that way since the world kind of,
everything's different. Everything's foreign right now.
Everything's topsy-turvy. Yeah, exactly. So
what kind of impact do you think your travel experiences had though on the people close to you, like your friends and your family? Like, do you think that maybe they have started to adopt a little bit more of a, like I'm speaking from my experience of my family, I think it was important because their initial reaction to me going to Kuwait was absolutely, they were terrified for me to go. And then it was funny after Kuwait when I had considered also a job in Abu Dhabi. And at that point, the family was like, well, why would you go to Abu Dhabi? Kuwait seems safe. You seem to be okay there. So it was just like kind of fear of the next thing. So I think it was like the ability to show a lot of people back home that the Middle East in particular wasn't as what they always see on the news or things like that. But do you think that your extensive travels had somewhat of an impact on the people close to you and your families, or what were maybe some of their thoughts in you going from place to place?
Yeah, I think when my parents found out that I would have insurance, they were like, okay, cool. Let us know how it is. That was literally the sign off. So, from there.
They're like, we did our part. You're on your own.
Yeah. They're like, well, you'll figure it out. They were always very supportive.
That's awesome.
Of the whole thing. And I think after a while, they became a bit more numb to it. I would call them and say like, okay, well, now I'm actually going to go to this country. And they'd be like, okay, well, let us know your new number. So they definitely became a bit more numb to it after a while. And we're just like, literally like, okay, what wacky new thing are you going to tell us?
That's awesome.
At this time. So friends and stuff, I think those first 2 years were a bit more excited and interested. And, for better, for worse, I had been away for 6.5 years and, perhaps I didn't do the best job of trying to stay engaged with everybody. So I will say that a lot of those, friendships and interactions that I have been kind of like, let go or slid down, which is neither good nor bad. It just is. And
right.
I think that's about the best.
Relationships change.
Yeah, relationships change. And, like I went back to Austin twice in the last year, actually. And it's, people are still interested to see me and chat with me, but not in the same way like those first 2 years.
Right.
It almost kind of like their eyes glaze over if I talk about too much stuff. And,
right.
and that's something that I actually had to kind of contend with. And I would say was maybe part of the reason why I wasn't like trying to stay in Austin when if I was coming back to the US, I didn't feel like I needed to have that experience again. And I could appreciate the connection that I had with people, but I didn't need to just move back there and just try to reconnect and make all these things. But that being said, I think a takeaway is that people are there for you if you want them to be. And like I had a friend from college who I was close with, but I hadn't really been in contact with outside of social media since I graduated 10 years ago. And he's lived in California for quite a while, in San Francisco. So I haven't even like physically seen him for a long, long time. And when I came back sometime in late January, I reconnected with him and talked to him and spoke to him a little bit more like a mentor. And, I think it was really great to know that people are there for you. Like, even if you think that you've kind of let them go.
Right.
I think a lot of people are open and willing to reconnect if you make the time and energy for them, and kind of knowing that someone's there for you as you're back, even if it's just kind of like a conversation way is a big thing. So I don't know. I think, and that is maybe some of the reason like that people don't move abroad and that don't take these kind of bigger moves. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to miss my friends or family. And it's like, well, I think they'll be there for you. If you make them a priority, they'll be there for you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can always come back to that. So, and not like I ever told anybody off, but
No.
I definitely have been negligent in keeping up with a lot of the relationships I had built. And so I think trying to find those that I, want to reconnect with and kind of purposely build back up is something that has been refreshing to me and thinking about. And being outside of the US for so long, I just kind of like out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. That's, well said. I think if the connection, like a strong foundation of that was there to begin with, I think it is not necessarily easy to pick up where you left off, but you just know that the people are going to be there. That was one of the things I think with risk taking that I kind of use as a thought process is at the end of the day, I think I've made enough connections with people that if I get into a situation where it doesn't work out, like no one's going to leave me on the street. No one's going to leave me, completely alone. Like, I think that, you do have somebody that you can connect with and trying to pick up where you left off. I think a similar thing of not wanting to go back to Omaha, which is where I lived before Kuwait, was like, I've already kind of been there and done that. And I feel like the relationships that I've made there, like if I want to reconnect or rekindle any of those, like the opportunity is there to do it and from somewhere within the States or anywhere. Yeah.
I think I know we're talking about expat stuff and I kind of breezed through my experience a little bit. And this is something I think more about now in hindsight is when you're an expat and you've left all your creature comforts, your friends and your family, your connection with other people where you are can be pretty important.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, like in Kuwait, where we all were basically living in like a real world situation where we all lived and worked and commuted together, and lived in the same building. So it was a little different. And then you've got your own kind of weirdo scene of all the trainers in town basically know each other. And that's that. So you've got this own kind of like mini microcosm.
The social life takes an effort. Yeah.
Yeah. But then as I saw later on, throughout these other scenes, especially in these places where there were expats and I stayed longer, is I think it's an interesting situation where you can have a very intense connection with somebody just because you're both in it together. And it's kind of like, okay, well, you know exactly what's going on for me. I know exactly what's going on for you. So
fast, hard friendships. Yeah.
Fast, hard friendships. Yeah. But then by the same page, because expat scenes tend to be so transient, I became a lot more numb to kind of letting people go.
Yeah.
And then I think, not necessarily for my own fault, but whether just kind of where I was, but especially like that last year in Vietnam, I was a lot more like reticent to go out of my way to connect with anybody. And so I kind of kept everyone a little bit more at an arm's length just because it was like, well, you'll be gone soon.
Right.
Or maybe I knew that
where people come to leave.
Yeah.
Eventually. Yeah.
Or I knew that I would be gone soon. So that's something that I do think about a lot. I do have some friends from Vietnam and I at least have a couple that I'm still consider myself fairly close to, but I definitely felt the longer I stayed in the game, perhaps the like more jaded I got a little bit.
Yeah.
And perhaps that was because I was kind of like just running out of steam myself. Right. So I don't know. Something I don't have firm thoughts on, but I think about now kind of in hindsight a little bit more. So
that's a good point.
So I'm interested to see how I socialize being back in a more safe, being back in a more
social experiment.
Me as a social experiment come back in. It's like bringing in like a wild dog back into like a domesticated environment. I'm not going to start nipping at people's heels in my house trained. I don't know. Do I need the crate? So whatever it is, but
well, right now we're all kind of crating.
Yeah. Well,
maybe it's exactly what you need.
This is a good little experiment, and I mean, not to, if I was to phrase this in a good way,
right?
This is a check for your ability to handle inconvenience and adversity.
Totally.
And no, I'm not equating being quarantined in your house to being an expat, but just inconvenience and getting pushed outside of your routine and your norm. How do you react to that? Like, take this as a time to reflect on that. And if you're coming around with nothing but a negative takeaway, and I understand some people are in positions where their pay has been cut or they aren't working at all. And that, that is a hard situation to be in. That's a hard environment. But, especially if you're still able to work and you're still able to earn money, but you just feel inconvenienced and you kind of like feel yourself start taking a victim mentality. I think that's a time to start doing some like self-work and reflection and along those lines. And I don't know if you are the person that's kind of like, okay, well, I know this is hard and this is there, but I can work through it. And I'm kind of like aware of my inconveniences that's surrounding it. That would probably mean you're in a good position to be an expat. because that is kind of like constantly being challenged, being put out of your place and inconvenienced. And it's a bit of a moving target as well. So
totally. That's resiliency. I think that's a great parallel. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really not trying to equate it as a one-to-one, but just like
no,
overcoming adversity is overcoming adversity.
Right.
And if you walk such a fragile line that this is like ruining your life, then trying an expat gig probably isn't for you. But if you're like, okay, like I can handle this, then maybe it is. And I don't know. I would always.
Maybe it's just moving to a new city for some people. Like maybe that's the level of risk they're,
1,000%. Yeah. I mean, I think we'll probably try to wrap this up. So I would encourage anybody to try living as an expat. I think there's a lot of value to it.
Right.
For a lot of different reasons, even if it is as culturally similar as like moving to London or moving to the UK for 6 months, which is like going to your cousin's house, but it's still enough different.
Yeah.
Just enough to like get you into something a little different. I mean, the further you move away from your culture and your environment, I think the better it is, but it's also higher risk, higher reward in terms of your growth and your capacity to handle that and overcome it, and how like, stimulated you are and how much things you have to overcome by your environment, your experience. But, if there's a lot of trainers and coaches that listen to this, then I would say, like, this is an amazing vehicle that you have to be able to be employed. And as long as you're willing to kind of like play the game and, take things for what they are and not feel like a victim mentality, and kind of be grateful for the experience, even if it's kind of uncomfortable for the time being. This is a great way to get out and about without essentially resorting to being an English teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm not shitting on unilaterally.
No, but yeah.
But I am a little bit. So like,
we'll just leave it at that.
I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Cool. So I think, you got anything else?
No, I think that's awesome. I think you taught us a lot. Thank you for sharing your experience. Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next for you. And if people you are coaching, and I know you do offer some remote, do you have anything like, do you want to lead people anywhere to maybe be able to work with you or find you? Or is that something?
Yeah, I would, Instagram is going to be the best place to start.
Cool.
So it's at B Palmers with a Z. So that's BEEPALMERZ would be my handle.
We'll be sure to tag you as well when we launch this episode so people can find you easily.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me and take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can also find us on Instagram at The Project Kuwait. Thank you, and join us next time.